Welcome, fellow frequent flyers of the Europa Book Club, and welcome newbies to the Europa Book Club. My name is Tatiana. I am the Publicity and Marketing Assistant here at Europa Editions, and I'm going to be your pilot this evening. And there is a chat function that I wanted to point out for you all. Feel free to talk in there, say hi, let us know where you're tuning in from. It's also going to be your main source to ask your questions this evening. So you can just send them throughout the whole conversation if anything sparks your interest, and, let them know. We'll have the questions on, ready and available. Also, at the end, you do have a raise hand function. It's a part of Zoom. So when we get to the Q&A section, every so often we do like to have you guys, ask your questions directly to John and Anne and get to talk to them, because I think that's one of the beauties of the book club that we have going on here. Hi, everybody. Hi, Gary. Hi, Rondi. This evening, we're joined by two amazing people. The first moderating the conversation is John Domini. He's the author of numerous novels, many set in Naples, as well as a critic and translator himself. In June 2019, he published his fourth novel, The Color Inside a Melon. The Color Inside a Melon, and he has won awards in all genres, with fiction in the Paris Review and nonfiction in the New York Times. Alan Schuss of NPR's All Things Considered described his work as witty and biting, and he has a memoir coming out next year about his time spent in Naples called The Archaeology of Good Ragu. And then joining us tonight is also Anne Goldstein, Ferrante translator extraordinaire and the translator of tonight's novel, A Girl Returned. She is the senior editor and head of the copy department at The New Yorker, and obviously a great translator, including all of Elena Ferrante's works. She has also completed translated works of Italian author Primo Levi, which was a huge project to take on, and that's absolutely mind-blowing how big that entire volume of work is. So congratulations to you on that. John, I'm gonna pass it off to you and let you guys get the ball rolling.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, Tatiana. It's a pleasure to work with you, and it's an honor to be on the same screen with you. I have here Donatella Di Pietrantonio's novel, A Girl Returned. It's a rather remarkable story that she gets into immediately, and I'm going to read just a bit. It seemed a good way to start. The very first page is the narrator, and you will notice something about the narrator. I think even in these pages, you'll notice an interesting literary trick Di Pietrantonio uses. I was 13, yet I didn't know my other mother. I struggled up the stairs to her apartment with an unwieldy suitcase and a bag of jumbled shoes. On the landing, I was greeted by the smell of recent frying and a wait. The door wouldn't open. Someone was shaking it wordlessly on the inside and fussing with the lock. I watched a spider wriggle in the empty space, hanging at the end of its thread. There was a metallic click, and a girl with loose braids that hadn't been done for several days appeared. She was my sister, but I had never seen her. She opened the door wide so I could come in, keeping her sharp eyes on me. We looked like each other then, more than we do as adults. Now that's the very first chapter, but I'm going to read just a tiny bit more. That was the first chapter, and here's the next. The woman who had conceived me didn't get up from the chair. The child she held in her arms was sucking his thumb on one side of his mouth. Maybe a tooth was coming in. Both of them looked at me, and he stopped his monotonous crying. I didn't know I had such a little brother. You're here, she said. Put down your things. I lowered my eyes to the smell of shoes that wafted from the bag if I moved it even slightly. From behind the closed door of the room, I'm sorry about that. From behind the closed door of the room at the back came a tense, sonorous snoring. The baby started whining again and turned to the breast, dripping saliva on the sweaty, faded cotton flowers. That's the opening, and I'm sorry about the brief interruption, unexpected. I look forward to hearing from y'all, but especially I look forward to hearing from Anne. One of the central things about this book, Anne, is that it presents the two Italies, the privileged Italy, the Italy of money, the Italy of the downtowns that the tourists know, the Italy of gelato and espresso in the cafe. And then it presents the other Italy, the Italy to which this girl has just been delivered, an unnamed narrator, as you see. The girl has been delivered to her birth mother in the depressed Italy, the Italy where there's not much to eat, and it's certainly not prepared. One of her first challenges is to pluck a chicken. Can you talk about that difference that she presents?
Yeah, thank you all for being here, first of all, and thank you, John. One of the things that I think is, this is not exactly that, but is that you find things out about the two Italies and about the whole situation through the eyes of the narrator. In other words, it's just as mysterious to you as it is to her. And so you slowly discover the fact that there are two Italies in a way. As she's been, thrust into this other world, she's used to a totally different world, and she doesn't understand it, and you don't really understand it, and you don't really know why she's there. And I think that one of the great things that the author does is allow you to discover this along with her, what this other Italy is, and the reason that she's been pushed back and forth in these two Italies, I guess you could say.
Yeah. In relationships, she has to sort them out.
Right. Yeah. No, go ahead.
Her birth brother, Vincenzo, is also, at least for a while, a love interest. And This is highly complicating.
Right, but it's like another example of the strangeness of what's going on, of her inability to know, to understand what her place is in this family that she's just been sort of thrown into. She was an only child with her other family, her other mother. I mean, which is the mother and which is the other mother is a question. But she's been used to being the sort of, really, you would say, the spoiled only child of a middle-class family. And now suddenly she's one of five or six children in a very poor family that basically has no money. As you said, barely can put food on the table. So it's very obviously confusing.
There's the confusion the other way as well, isn't there? One of the scenes that really struck me is when she brought Vincenzo to the beach. She brought her two closest siblings to the beach. And again, I don't want to spoil the book at all, but discovering how they really don't fit in at her Lido.
Yeah.
Quite a scene there.
Right. I mean, and they also struggle to figure out what she's doing with them. I mean, in the beginning, it's like she's just one more mouth to feed, and they don't appreciate that. They don't even think of her as a person practically. I mean, yeah. Again, I don't want to give away anything. I just realized.
Yeah, but it comes up in. Go ahead.
No, maybe everyone's read the book. I don't know.
some of them one hopes at least. The you know, I know it's always difficult to go back into an old project, but can you recall, as a translator, specific words that conveyed this, or phrasings that conveyed this difference, this conflict within the character, una spacca personality, a split personality?
Well, one thing is, I mean, there is some dialect in this book, some dialect words, which some of which I kept in dialect, and some of which I translated into a more, you know, more slangy English, I would say, you know, to make it clear, because she doesn't understand the dialect. The title of this book in Italian was La Minuta, which is an Italian dialect word from Abruzzo, I guess it's Abruzzo. So I was always curious about like what Italians would make of this, of having a book that was that had a title that many people wouldn't even understand, but they didn't seem to find it a problem.
Yeah. Well, and Minuta, yeah, was certainly the word I thought of. In this way, it's distinct from Ferrante, who I attended a number of those wonderful Ferrante talks that took place over the summer with Europa. And everybody kept asking about dialect in Ferrante, and it's worth reiterating in what you told me.
Yes, well, that Ferrante doesn't use dialect. I mean, she uses a word here and there, but she doesn't really use a lot of dialect. She says she said in dialect, you know, whatever. And Di Pietro Antonio, she doesn't really use that much dialect either, but I think it's in a way, it's really, yeah.
It packs a punch when it shows up.
Yeah.
And the title, to use a dialect word in the title, yeah.
Right, yeah. So that was a problem to translate. Because in Italian, even if you didn't know what the word meant, you knew that it was a feminine noun. And whereas, so you know, you didn't need to, you know, you could work it out or not work it out, but at least you knew that much. Whereas, you know, in English, we don't have that. We don't have the ability to do that.
I thought if I can just, it's not a question exactly, but if I can just praise you, I thought that was a wonderful way to handle the title, A Girl Returned, because it sounds like a love song. Maybe you could talk about that, because love is an issue in the book. What about this family she thought she loved? What about this new brother who is at least very interesting to her?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, the family relationships are really, they're pretty complicated, because she's, as I said, she's an only child. Suddenly she has a sister. She's got all these brothers, older, and then the baby. And then she's got this almost completely silent father. Actually, she has two pretty silent fathers. Both of the fathers are quite silent, but one is, you know, he has a job, he's part of the family. The other one seems like almost a cipher. I mean, and then there's the mother. I mean, there's the mother, the new mother, or the birth mother, I guess you'd say, is a very complicated character. I mean, she's so, she really doesn't give an inch in a way. I mean, eventually she does, but she shows absolutely no emotion to really any of her children, except when she's mad, when she's angry, right?
Yeah. That would be a climax of the book, when the unnamed narrator, in effect, gives a name to her mother. That is, she understands why her mother did it. I again don't want to give away too much, but she achieves a kind of climactic insight into why a mother would do this.
Right, but then she's got the other mother who dropped her off again in this unknown family. She's got it, so she's really has, that's also a complicated relationship, because she doesn't have any idea why that mother did what she did. And she eventually comes to understand it, whether she forgives it or not is another question.
Yeah.
But it's complicated. She really has two mothers, neither of which she has a very good relationship with, ultimately. She says she is. There's that quote, I think you might have had it in your review, about the word mother is meaningless to me, basically.
Yeah, there's a wonderful line in there. Yeah.
Yeah.
The I got two ways to go here. I'm gonna try something different. Are you aware, and maybe some of the listeners are aware, but who's read the Joy Luck Club? Who's got a memory of that?
Oh, I never read that. I never read that.
Okay. Well, of course, it was a great international sensation.
Right. Yeah.
And I was going to say, and since you haven't read, but I was going to say, one of the driving engines of that plot is a Chinese girl discovering that she has siblings, family, that the mother had to get rid of in China in order to survive, sort of drop them off.
Yeah.
In China.
Oh, wow.
I mean, it occurred to me while reading the book, though I couldn't bring it up in my review, that this is an immigrant story in its way. It's as if somebody is moving between countries.
Right.
This is an immigrant tragedy, a tragedy brought on by poverty and dislocation.
Yeah.
In the case of the Joy Luck Club, the dislocation caused by the Japanese invasion.
Right.
And, just before World War II or the beginning of World War II. In this case, poverty, sheer financial need.
Mm-hmm.
And that was certainly something fascinating to me. And, basically this girl has to figure out a way to live with this enormous rift in her life.
Yeah.
And I thought the novel did create that tension.
Mm-hmm.
That on the surface she's a success, she's got a life, she's even helped the poor family, if I'm reading it right, but she's still living with this immense gap within.
Yeah. I mean, I think school is the thing that really, in a way, it's like, as in the Neapolitan novels, school is the thing that that holds you together, and that gets you out of where you are. Both of the, can do both of those things. And I think that's, that's one of the ways that she copes, is by school. She has to spend the whole summer with this family, not going to school. That's getting oriented and disoriented. But I think once she goes to school, I think that's helpful to her, because she knows about school. That's something that she could bring from her other life, in a way.
And even help the family insofar as they want to get help. Help her siblings or new siblings.
And, going back to Ferrante, to the new Ferrante novel, which is also told from the point of view of a teenager, of a 12-year-old, a similarly middle-class girl who discovers that she has she discovers it in quite a different way. She discovers on her father's side that she has all these relatives who are from a working class family, or working class, or even
much
than working class.
Yeah.
But she also has this basis of school that kind of, she has that experience that holds her together in a way.
An essential defining factor of Italian adolescence. Can you get ahead? Can you pass those exams? Yeah. Well, all right. Let me suggest a possible bone to pick, because some would say that a girl having been through the tremendous dislocation that the unnamed narrator hears, that she would be unable to function at school, but instead she throws herself into school. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think actually, to me, it made a lot of sense that she threw herself into school, because it's kind of a safe place. I mean, she's made fun of by the other students, but the teacher favors her. And so that gives her a kind of confidence, even though she's upset a lot of the time. it does give her a kind of confidence, and she knows that she's good, that she can do well in school. And to me, it seems like the place where that she can hold on to herself in some way, because she
I
knows
get you.
herself as a student.
Yeah, and it certainly, that starts to come through as the book goes on, as you're pulled in deeper to her struggle.
But it's similar to to Elena, to Lenu in the Neapolitan novels, had that same, like, school is the place where she's not at home. She's away from, she's out of the neighborhood, out of her family.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, especially when she goes into Naples to high school. She really, it's a place where she can, I mean, it's got its troubles, but it's also an escape, and it turns out to be the way that she can get out of her life.
Mm-hmm.
Or out of
we're talking about Ferrante. Seems like the time to talk about differences between, I'm sure many of our listeners here are also Ferrante fans. God knows I'm a fan. I reviewed the latest book too, and great job. I was always comparing. It was hard not to compare them in my head. The additional, the touches of actual dialect, I noticed that. And I would say that A Girl Returned, Di Pietrantonio, is decidedly less intense, because whether we're talking the latest book or the quartet, or even all the way back to Amore Molesto, everything in Ferrante can suddenly turn bare-knuckled, whereas this one, she's sitting back a bit, she's distant, she's thinking a little more. Can you talk about that difference in style?
Well, first of all, the sentences are shorter in Di Pietrantonio, and they're simpler. It's not to say they don't have a similar kind of power, but it's quite a different. It's made in quite a different way. I mean, Ferrante's sentences are famously kind of run-ons, and they pile up, and they sort of aim it. They seem to be aiming at something. She's always, she talks about wanting to get somewhere, wanting to get to the truth of something, and kind of, she uses a lot of words. I mean, she digs into things till she gets to where she wants to go. It's as if she's bringing you with her in that. Whereas I think that Di Pietrantonio is more, she's as you said, she sort of lays it out for you.
Well, you could argue it's more, she's so shocked, she can only say a few things.
Yeah, right.
You could argue that it's shock. It's almost a disassociation.
Right.
And you remember that early scene here where the new brother and sister, Vincenzo and Adriana, take her to the fair.
Yeah.
In this tiny, cheap fair on the edge of the periferia, and riding in the swing, she feels separated from Earth,
Yeah.
And it's part happiness and part, just something else.
Where am I?
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, as you put it like that, it does seem like kind of a metaphor of the where am I.
And a good one. And none of what we're saying is to be construed as a criticism of Di Pietrantonio. Every writer,
not at all.
Every writer does things differently.
Yeah.
I would say also, there's a certain dreaminess in Di Pietrantonio. That's how it felt to me. She was, she would slip into where she was in the present and then back into the past. Suddenly.
Yeah. Well, and then there is this kind of underlying mystery of, what is really going on here, that the reader feels. I mean, I was, the first time I read it, I was so baffled. I couldn't understand it. I mean, of course, I eventually did understand it, but then I saw that she, as I said before, she's really taking, you, the reader, are figuring it out with her.
Yeah. And if we could just get a bit into your process,
Mhm.
these are books that people send you, or do you discover them on your own? I'm assuming that once upon a time you discovered Ferrante
I
on your
didn't. No, I didn't. No, it came from Europa.
own.
Both of
Always,
these books came from Europa, actually.
yeah.
They
Well,
discovered the books for me.
yeah. By now, I would think, yeah, you get people make selections for you, but I would have thought that once upon a time you know,
No, I didn't. I didn't know Ferrante until I'm sure everybody. I've probably said this a million times, but until Europa, until Edizione AO in Rome decided to found Europa Editions, and they wanted to publish Ferrante as their first book. That's how, and that's how I got into the Ferrante business.
well, that's perhaps Primo Levi you found out on your own. You found him
Well,
early.
not exactly. No. Oh, that was also somebody's kind of visionary editor at Norton had the idea of doing the complete Primo Levi in English. And he doesn't speak Italian. He needed somebody to, sort of deal with the Italian part of it. In fact, originally we were just going to put together the old translations, but as I looked into it, it turned out that they were not very complete. So in the end, we decided to retranslate almost everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway.
I'm very interested in your background, but getting back to this book, here would be a good one thing I concluded in my review is that it tends towards a happy ending. It's definitely ambivalent, but it tends towards a happy ending.
Yeah, that's true.
What do you think? What do you think? Is this a tragedy or a comedy, as Aristotle would ask?
I guess it's a comedy in the sense that it ends with possibility rather than impossibility. I mean, it's you feel that there's a possibility of reconciliation. I mean, there's a couple of things. I think you mentioned this in your review. There's a couple of places where you have like a glimpse of her as an adult, and you would not say that she's a completely healed, so to speak, from, if you want to call it, this rift in her life, but she's kind of come to terms with it in the sense that she can live. I mean, she can live with it. And the last scene with the sister, I mean, I think there's a definitely the idea that they've all been able to come to terms with this situation, but not that they've really been able to get over it.
Yeah.
I don't know. What did you think?
I felt that she achieved a kind of triumph, and if people aren't sick of hearing about Ferrante, I must say it made me think of Lena's triumph. There's that moment at the end of the fourth in the quartet where she's in her apartment in Torino with her 3 daughters. And she thinks, right, this is enough to come through this, and 3 grown daughters who know themselves and are getting on with their lives. That's enough. That's an accomplishment in a life. Right. And I felt something the same with the unnamed narrator's journey. Yeah. Yeah. Right. The question is, if I sort of read a book and say, well, is it too happy an ending? That may be my problem. I may be looking too much for the darkness. So you thought it was a little too happy? Obviously I liked the book. I hope that's clear. I know. You can still. I'm happy to sink my teeth into it again, but. I did come back to this question, perhaps the readers thing. I'd be interested to know what our other readers here think. But I did come back to this question, could she have gotten over this dislocation that much? Could she really have excelled at school? But there's a very good reason. As you said, she excels at school because it's the one place where she feels at home and knows how to, knows the rules and how to get ahead. As long as she's in the classroom,
she kind of knows where she is. Of course, as soon as she steps outside, it's all confusing again. When she goes to high school in the city, and then she starts to see the other mother again, it's just as confusing in a way.
Yeah. So my misgivings are of the kind that are fruitful. You just keep thinking about her and her situation.
Right.
I would say that I don't know Italian families that have wrestled with such a thing, but I do know Italian families who have adopted a kid, and the Italian system of adoption, at least until through Berlusconi, the Italian system of adoption was better than in the States. They would match kids and parents, but there'd be actual tests, aptitudes and things. And I did see both adopted kids flourish because of where I worked and things I did. I saw adopted kids flourish and adopted kids collapse. And it reinforces how you notice how there's often no predicting how a child's going to handle the vicissitudes of life. Yeah.
I mean, without giving it away.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that this
It's
particular—
a good book. If you haven't read it, folks, read it.
Yeah. That the situation in this case was at a certain point in Italy quite common.
Yeah. I heard of such stories. I never met people. Yeah. I do have one cousin who went away to live with family, but it wasn't quite this day. He always knew where his family was. Right. He would go back and forth. Yeah. And it was a man, so of course it's he had a certain power and privilege to begin with. But it is a tragedy and exists elsewhere. I thought of Joy Luck Club, but aren't there trailer park kids who are raised with their better in America, who are raised with their better off
probably.
Aunts and uncles? Yeah. It's got more of a reach than just Italy. Yeah. I want to go back to one word before we open it to questions. We'll have to open it soon. One word. Of course, there is a mafia in this zona degradata. In this bad part of town. Right, I forgot about mafia. That. Yeah. And you use an interesting word, gypsies, which, as we know, in Italian is zingari. Yeah. And, was that the word in the book? That was the word. Yeah. I mean, I thought of them. I didn't really think of them as the mafia, although I probably should have. But but I did think of them. They were the crooks who ran. Who were the crooks? That was the group who were the crooks, who were the bad guys. Yeah. As they often are seen in many places in Italy. Yeah, but they could also get things done. They could get you a ride. They could get you. Yeah. Well, at least in this case. But yes, it was that. She did use that word. Zingari. Yeah. You see how different that is from La Sistema, the Camorra in Naples, called the system. Right. It's like a corporation. Yeah. It's colder. Zingari is almost romantic. Yeah. I guess so. I don't know. One of my first relationships with zingare was one of the first times I went to Rome, and people were always saying, "Watch out for the zingari." Yeah, sure, right. They'll rob you blind. But another association is that they also were among the victims of the Germans in the Second World War, right near my house. Among the very first. There's a plaque to the zingari. What? In Rome? In Rome, yeah. On Via delle Zingari. Wow. Yeah. I've spent some time in Rome, but I haven't seen that one. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Well, now we're getting to the time of questions. I can pop open chat here. Let's see about that. Or Tatiana, are you going to funnel some to me?
We do have one already. It came in earlier in your conversation. It says, "Hi, Anne from Dublin. Did you find challenging the translation of possessive pronouns in A Girl Returned, especially with reference to words like mother, father, uncle, etc.? In Italian, the way the biological mother is referred to is quite unusual and points to an obvious sense of displacement, i.e. la madre instead of mama or mia madre. How did you approach this?"
Well, it was a problem. It was definitely a problem. I mean, because I know that in Italian, yeah, that you use the, you would use that. And she never says, I mean, she doesn't say mama. She doesn't call anybody. Well, I guess she does sometimes. But I made a deliberate decision to use the mother because in English, it's estranging. And I think that that was, I just kind of thought that that was important because she doesn't really think of her as her mother. And so I thought that I kept it as the. I was very conscious of it with the mother.
There are English books that use that, the mother, the father, to distance.
Yeah.
To keep the relationship distant.
Yeah.
The most recent one that did it was by Blake Butler, a very different sort of author.
Oh.
He did it too. Yeah, yeah.
Uh-huh.
But excellent question.
Yeah.
Hello to Dublin, where I spent a lovely 2 weeks recently.
I think that was from Enrica.
Yes. The next one's from Gary, who wants to ask you, Anne, about crafting the voices of the narrator and Adriana. How did that go about? How did that feel? Was it difficult? What challenges did you face, et cetera, et cetera?
Oh dear. I mean, you know, when I talk about things like this, I mean, I think that it has to do with just paying close attention to the Italian and trying to convey what the author has done in Italian to create those voices. So I think that's kind of I mean, it probably sounds like a kind of almost mystical answer, but it's not exactly. I mean, it just has to do with really attentiveness, I think, to the original.
I would say Adriana is blunt, and
yes,
that's
right.
That's her power is to see the truth and speak it plainly.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, I think that that's. I mean, I don't think that I wrote that character differently from the way she is in Italian, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Yeah, but that's right. She is definitely. And the narrator is much more sort of.
Well, she's not used to people speaking, especially not children, speaking to her directly.
Right. Yeah, like more retiring, I guess is the word. Or shyer.
Yeah, using euphemisms, you know.
Yeah.
Force, the great art of Italian denial and
diplomacy. Right. Right. Yeah.
And of course, everybody, if you'd like to ask your questions directly to Anne and John, there is a raise hand function that Zoom has that you can do, and we can unmute you and you can talk to them directly if that's how you also would want to go about it. And I know that the book, this was a project not as recent, but do you find that you approach each project very differently? Like I know for the latest one for Ferrante, do you approach each author differently? Do you even approach one author's own different works differently? What's your go-to method when you're trying to translate something?
I think that I approach everything the same way. I mean, I approach it as a book, as a project, as to start off, it's just typing. I mean, it's not just typing, but it's, you know, it's just, it really, everything starts off the same. I do, because I always do a very rough first draft of everything. And so it's only when I start looking back at it that it, you know, that when I start revising, really, that books take their different shapes or their different voices or their different forms.
One of the things I've noticed, Dan, is differences between late different changes that are made late in the process. I've seen differences between the galleys, the last galleys, the ARC that I'm reading as a reviewer, and the final version.
Right.
I've seen corrections made, and I'm sure Michael Reynolds or some editor is involved there, but it shows the care that you keep working with it. How can I?
Yeah, no, I really like to read. I mean, the first drafts are, of course, are done on a computer, on a screen. And I always, at a certain point, I like to print it out and read the manuscript on paper. But I also like to read the galleys, because that's yet another form in which you can see somehow the physical forms give you a different view of the language in a way. I know, I forget who it was. I think it was Alex Zucker, who's a translator from Czech, said that he sometimes will print out his final version in the form that the book is really going to have. I mean, you can do that now. Like the typeface, the words, the pages, and then he reads it. So he really has a sense of, he's reading the book and he can see changes that he might not have seen in other formats.
I've heard a woman who works with Croatian and Serbian, Ellen Elias Burzak. I don't want to get too much into shop talk, but I've heard Ellen Elias Burzak talking about this constant refinement and wrestling with the right way to put it into English. She said the very important thing is to keep in mind that you're telling a story for somebody in another culture.
Yeah, right.
And going off of that, John, as somebody who is first generation Serbian, with the languages of Serbian and Croatian, they're so similar, but also completely different based on their dialects and, culturally what's happened with the countries and splitting apart and wanting to, differentiate themselves from one another. With dialect, and how much does that come into play when you're translating? Are you translating the dialect? Are you just doing normal Italian? How much does that affect your translations?
Well, as I sort of said, I mean, it's, if it's dialect, you don't have to, but it's very hard to translate dialect because English doesn't really have dialects. I mean, English has accents, but even if you try to use an accent, it just sounds kind of phony, at least to me. So if there's really passages in dialect, the only one I can think of offhand, I mean, Ferrante really doesn't have big passages, neither does the Pietrantonio. They have sentences or words. Pasolini has a lot of actual dialect or sort of dialect in his books. And really the only thing that I've come up with is to be, as I said, sort of more colloquial, a little more slangy, perhaps less grammatical, which goes against the grain for me, but nevertheless.
Yeah.
We've got another great question from Enrica, but about the Ferrante effect and like how that's kind of swept a lot of English speaking readers. Do you know if, Di Pietrantonio was influenced by Ferrante in any way?
I don't know. I really don't know.
Have you met her?
I haven't. We corresponded a little bit, but we didn't really, I never was able to meet her.
It would be hard to imagine. I looked her up a bit in it. I mean, there was an article in La Repubblica or review article. I looked her up a bit, but it would be hard to think that any informed Italian writer hadn't, made it a point to encounter Ferrante, learn something about her. Encounter her in print. I mean, it'd be important.
It's also possible that it's given, that the Ferrante effect has given women writers, Italian women writers, a kind of freedom to write books that they might not have felt they could write in the Italian world.
I think you remember that scene in is it the first or the second of the quartet where Lena is at her first presentazione for her first book, and a critic challenges her. Is that too obscene?
Yeah.
Too frank in its sexuality. And I have the impression, insofar as I know the Italian mind, I have the impression that she has freed up the subject for Italian women.
Yeah.
The way, if we can go back to Dublin, the way Joyce did once upon a time for Irish race, she's freed up woman's sexuality in a way that.
Yeah, no, I think that's probably true. Yeah, because, yeah.
And going back to the topic of culture, and John, I would also love to hear your thoughts on this as well, but how much do you believe you need to be immersed in the culture of the language you're translating in order to keep the tone right? Or do you think just a fluency and a lexicon and a knowledge of the language is enough to translate?
No, it's not. I mean, you have to have some sense of the culture. I mean, that's always my, you know, my worry. I'm always worrying about not having enough culture. But I do think, I mean, I think, you know, I mean, yes, you can do a lot with, I think, with knowing the language, with the dictionary, with reading. I mean, for me, reading was really important. I mean, reading Italian books.
Do you often read Italian books for pleasure, or
I'm sorry?
do you often read Italian books for pleasure, or does it?
I do. No, I do. Yeah. Well, I mean, I have, you know. I'm sorry.
Insofar as I get any reading for pleasure, here, I read Italian books for pleasure. Sure.
Yeah.
It's one of the ways I prepare for any visit to Italy. Maybe you do. One of the ways I prepare, get my fluency up, is reading a book. I find nothing matches that.
Yeah.
Go ahead. You were. I didn't mean to cut you.
For what I was going to say.
Well, I can say that it is very important to know the culture, and you never know enough. But if you are translating, it's even more important, I would argue, and I've heard this from editors too, that you know the culture into which you're translating.
Right.
I can talk about a problem I had with Italian. It's a common, una donna buona, una donna brava, and una donna per bene. Now, which of these is ironic?
Yeah.
One of them, una donna brava, as I understand it, can be ironic, like, oh yeah, she's a real good woman. And this was, and I was struggling with that a long time.
Yeah.
Per bene, una donna, una persona per bene is almost always a good person. That doesn't have a shadow side. But
right. No, but those are things that are really hard to know, and you know, that you kind of need to know, I guess. Well, depending, but then again, you know, you can sometimes things are ambiguous. I mean, you can ask, like I often ask Italians for help, and you can ask 3 Italians to get 3 different answers for what the meaning is of something.
Yeah.
So, you know.
True indeed. I would say too that it's a terrible thing trying to translate dialect and using, basically it's American Southern slang. It just does not. I'm not Mark Twain.
Yeah.
And the culture is in Mark Twain's culture. You can't use this old Southern slang.
No, I agree. Yeah. That's why it's so hard, because there really isn't any, you know, there's no English equivalent. And even if there was, maybe it wouldn't work anyway.
In Pasolino, and you probably know better than I, but in Pasolino, the use of dialect is often allied to criminal activity, homosexual activity.
Yeah. No, it's definitely the sort of, you know, underclass, I guess you would call it.
Yeah.
You know, writes about the street kids in Rome, kids living on the street, kids from poor families. Yeah, they do speak in that, what's been called actually Pasolini's version of Roman dialect. But
so would you say dialect is more popular with the younger crowd, or more popular with the younger crowd, as opposed to?
No. I think one of the great laments that you hear from Italians, and if there's somebody Italian here, they could probably tell me better, is that that dialects are disappearing.
Right.
you know, there's been this great
radio and
homogeneity.
television is
Exactly.
great
Yeah.
equalizer. But I will say that clearly, everything I've heard, clearly Neapolitan is the language of Italian rock and roll, Italian rap, any rock and roll, any pop song that's got a rap element. It's Neapolitan. And I could mention names, but it all goes, Pino Daniele would be the main figure there. Yeah.
And a lot of people are curious as to which books that you've really enjoyed reading in Italian. What are some of your favorites?
My favorites? Well, I've translated a lot of them.
A dream gig.
You know, I mean, you know, Primo Levi is wonderful. I think Pasolini is really wonderful as a novelist. I don't think he gets much, you know, he's not known in English as a novelist, and I think that he deserves to be. I think he's really wonderful. Elsa Morante, also a great novelist.
What do you think of The Betrothed?
Oh, Antonio, you know, I liked it. I like it.
Yeah.
You know, I have a friend.
Talk about ironic, you know.
Yeah. Well, this friend is, Michael Moore is doing a new translation. He's been working on it for years, which he's almost done. And, you know, we'll talk about it a lot.
Yeah.
John, what are some of your favorite books you've read in Italian?
Me?
Yeah.
Well, all right.
Oh.
All right. Passed down from my Neapolitan namesake great uncle, Giovanni Bice Domini, who was a priest who lived with, I was told, a mountain of books.
Oh, wow.
La Divina Commedia.
Oh, with the Gustav Doré.
Well, not
Dante,
really.
wow.
They're copies. You understand? They're copies
Yeah.
of the Gustav.
Oh, they're just facsimiles. Okay.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
but you know, somebody in 19th century Milan made copies of them.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Thanks a lot. It meant a lot to me that the family gave it to me.
Wow.
So hard to beat that, right?
Yeah.
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 But I like many books, and of course I was knocked out by Ferrante. I think it's interesting that both Morante and we now finally have an English translation of Ortese's Il mare non lava Napoli.
Right.
It's called the Neapolitan Chronicles here. But I think it's interesting that both of them had a fantasy element. And were I to pick a favorite, it wouldn't be Ferrante. It would be somebody who hasn't come up, Calvino. And it's important to me that I've been through a couple of Calvinos in Italian. I know the Italian Invisible Cities. I know the Italian Barone Rampante.
I know Calvino believes that if you've read his books in English, that you haven't read him, and that you've read more of the translator than you have him. And do you come across this quite a bit? Do you feel as though people think that the English translations are yours and the Italian versions are more of Elena's? How do you?
Oh, Ferrante?
Yeah. Do you think there's that separation, or that it is just fully a partnership?
My colleague Anne has brought up one of the miracles of translation, if you ask me, and I feel she has captured the spirit of Ferrante and managed to translate it into English, which you know is a very difficult thing. For what it's worth, William Weaver with Invisible Cities, I mean, he's got to be given credit for that book becoming an international sensation. William Weaver did an amazing, transcended his gift or something with that book.
Yeah,
I first read it in English. I didn't dare try the Italian in those days.
Yeah. Yeah, I tend not to read. I mean, I tend not to read things in translation. I mean, Italian books in translation,
Yeah.
of course, but I should.
Well, basically, Ferrante and others have called Italians away from experiment and surrealism back to realism, back to Tolstoy, back to the basics of the passions and property and it's not a bad thing. It's resulted in great work. And somebody like Salman Rushdie, who's always got the imagination working overtime, says he loves Ferrante. So my love of Calvino is a quirk in my character, my sensibility that, doesn't mean I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but doesn't mean that he's better translated than Ferrante or something. That appeals to me in a way it may not to somebody like Anne or someone else. Is that working? That makes sense.
No, it was a great answer. I think and just one more question, if you guys don't mind.
Sure.
But I think they're quite simple ones. They want to know when you gathered your interest in Italian and you started learning it and like really in-depthly learning it, and also, how you pick the books that you want to translate, if there's an overwhelm of projects or if you just kind of get assigned books. So a two-part question.
Well, I mean, I started learning Italian. I was like in my 30s or something, but I immediately, as soon as I started learning it, which is I'm not going to say how old I am now, but but I think as soon as I started learning it, I was immediately, I mean, I had this kind of desire to learn Italian for a long time. And when I finally was able to realize it, I was very serious about it almost immediately. And I really, we had this very informal class at the New Yorker. And then I read a lot, and I took a couple of other classes, and then I started translating sort of by accident. But that was a way of studying Italian in a way, was translating. I didn't really expect to be to be professional. I guess I'm a professional translator, but that's sort of what, it sort of happened accidentally, but I was always pretty very interested in it.
For what it's worth, my real immersion in Italian language and culture began in my 30s.
Oh.
I heard Italian in the home growing up.
But yeah.
Obviously, I had a pretty good acquaintance with it, better than most Americans.
Yeah.
But no, I really began reading and saying, okay, this is important to me in my 30s too.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Yeah.
It's actually wonderful to hear too.
Late 30s.
Because you hear a lot that, like, as you get older, the brain is less, elastic, can't hold languages as much anymore.
I would give anything.
Everything else is less elastic.
Right.
Do you guys speak any other languages than Italian?
I'm sorry?
Do you speak any other languages than English and Italian?
Well, I've studied, Latin, I don't speak Latin, but I did many years of elementary school Latin and French.
Yeah, I did Latin and school French too.
Yeah.
But as I tell them in France, my French is lost beneath my Italian now.
Yeah, mine too.
The verb constructions are gone.
Yeah.
I got a question for the attendees. We talked about the book. Have we interested you in this very good book? Have you read it? I'd like to hear something out there. Did this work for you? Did it interest you? Did it illuminate the book if you had read it? I'd like to hear what our listeners thought. Is there anything about that you can tell us out there in Zoom land? Anything coming in?
Gary said that he's read the book and it's magical and powerful.
Oh.
All right, Gary.
Anybody else before we have to say goodbye? Oh, here we go. It's moved. Everybody's read it. They've loved it. Someone says listening to this conversation makes them want to buy the book. Someone else says that they recommend it to all. Looks like wonderful responses.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's heartening. Well, how does that sound to you, Anne?
Good.
Great to hear.
Oh, and you've even inspired somebody to want to read it in the Italian.
Aha. Okay.
Huh.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
thank you. Thank you. And
Everybody.
complimenti.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, John.
Thank you, John.
Thank you very much.
Great to talk to you.
A wonderful discussion, and honestly, you could probably have gone on all night, and we all would have been completely happy and fine with that if we had the time. But I want to also thank all of our participants and listeners out there for coming and joining us this evening. The Europa Book Club is such a fun experience, and getting to hang out with you all and talk about good literature and translated literature is just a hallmark of every month. Next month, an apropos pick, I think, for October is Shadow Play by Irish author Joseph O'Connor. It's a historical fiction on the life of Bram Stoker and his relationship with Ellen Terry and Henry Irving, and how he got the inspiration behind Dracula. A beautiful read, very poetic. The wordplay is great. You know, if you're missing Broadway and if you're missing theater, you're definitely going to get a lot of that from this book. It'll fulfill all the spookiness you need for October and Halloween on the horizon. And you can get it at our partners, or at our bookstore partner, Left Bank Books. So thank you again, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great. Well,
Thank you.
have a good night. We'll see you all next month.